It was one of those stormy nights that I usually try to avoid. The day had been sweltering, but by evening, the weather turned ominous. Dark clouds gathered, and a thunderstorm broke out with a vengeance. I was home alone, having planned a quiet night in with my PlayStation 5. I had been waiting for this moment all week. No work, no interruptions, just me and my favorite game. I settled into the couch in my dimly lit living room, the only light coming from the TV. The game was an old favorite of mine, one that always managed to transport me to another world. Outside, the rain poured down heavily, and occasional flashes of lightning lit up the sky, followed by the deep rumble of thunder. The sound of the storm was almost hypnotic, blending into the background as I immersed myself in the game. About an hour into my session, the TV screen flickered and went dark. I froze, feeling a pang of anxiety. I knew the storm was severe, but I hadn't expected it to disrupt the power. I waited a few seconds, hoping the screen would come back on. When it did, I resumed playing, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that had settled in my stomach. Then I heard it, a rhythmic, persistent tapping at the window. I paused the game and glanced around the room. The tapping was too deliberate to be the rain or a branch hitting the glass. It sounded almost like someone was knocking. My heart raced as I got up to check. I approached the window slowly, trying to peer through the darkness and the driving rain. I saw nothing but the swirling storm outside. I took a deep breath, shaking off the creeping sense of dread. "It's probably just the wind," I muttered to myself, returning to the couch. I picked up the controller, but the tapping had stopped. I tried to focus on the game, but the uneasy feeling refused to go away. Just as I was getting back into the game, the lights flickered and went out completely. The room was plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the intermittent lightning. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached for my phone, using its flashlight to navigate to the kitchen for a proper flashlight. As I moved through the dark hallway, the tapping began again, louder this time. It was almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat, and it seemed to follow me. I quickened my pace, feeling a cold sweat break out on my back. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and headed back to the living room. When I returned, the tapping had stopped. I aimed the flashlight around the room, checking for anything out of place. Nothing. The TV was off and the game had stopped. I set the flashlight down and tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just the storm playing tricks on my mind. I sat back on the couch, trying to distract myself with the game. But just as I picked up the controller, the TV screen turned on by itself. It wasn't showing my game. Instead, it displayed a black screen with a simple white message. "I see you." A chill ran down my spine. I knew I had turned off the PlayStation before leaving the room, and I certainly hadn't turned it back on. I picked up the controller and tried to turn the console off, but nothing happened. The message remained on the screen, taunting me. Suddenly, I heard the tapping again, this time coming from inside the house. It was closer, more insistent. I looked around, heart racing, but saw nothing. I checked the windows, but they were all locked. The tapping seemed to be coming from the walls, echoing through the house. Desperate, I grabbed my phone and called my neighbor, hoping for some comfort or help. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried several more times, but each call failed. The storm's fury outside seemed to drown out all other sounds. I was alone, and the house felt eerily silent except for that relentless tapping. I decided to investigate. I turned on every light in the house and went room by room, checking for any signs of an intruder or anything out of place. I found nothing. The tapping had ceased and the storm had begun to abate, leaving only the sound of the rain. Finally, I sat back down on the couch, feeling utterly drained. The TV was off and the room was quiet. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but the message on the screen haunted me. Who could have turned on the TV and typed that message? The storm eventually passed and the lights came back on. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, keeping the lights on and the doors locked, my mind racing with possibilities. The next morning, I checked the security cameras around my house. They showed nothing unusual, just me moving through the house during the storm. To this day, I don't have a rational explanation for what happened that night. Was it just the storm playing tricks on my mind? Or was something or someone really trying to get my attention? I don't know, and part of me doesn't want to.
The rain had started earlier in the evening, soft at first, but by 10 p.m. it had escalated into a full-blown storm. The wind howled outside and thunder rumbled in the distance as sheets of rain slapped against the windows. Normally, I loved nights like this. There's something calming about being inside while the storm rages outside, cocooned in the warmth of your own home. I was at my desk, playing a new game I'd been hooked on all week. The glow of the monitor was the only light in my apartment, and the hum of my gaming PC mixed with the sounds of the storm. It was the perfect night for gaming. Dark, quiet, and isolated. Just as I was getting into a particularly intense part of the game, my phone lit up with a call. The number was unlisted. I didn't think much of it at first. I get spam calls all the time, and usually I just let them go to voicemail. But for some reason, in that moment, I felt compelled to answer. "Hello?" I said, keeping one eye on the game. There was silence on the other end, followed by the faint sound of static. Then, just as I was about to hang up, a voice came through, soft, almost too quiet to hear. "I'm sorry." That's all they said before the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a moment, confused. It didn't sound like a prank call. The voice, female, I think, had sounded strange, like she was barely able to speak. And the way she said sorry, it was almost personal. But I didn't recognize the voice, and there was no name or number attached to the call. It was odd, but I shrugged it off and went back to my game. An hour passed, and the storm outside seemed to be getting worse. The rain was now coming down in torrents, and the occasional flash of lightning lit up my apartment. I was just starting a new level when my phone rang again. Same unlisted number. I hesitated, but eventually picked up. "Hello," I said, a bit more impatiently this time. Silence again. The same soft static. And then, the same voice. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to leave." This time I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Something about the way she said it, like she was talking directly to me. But I didn't know anyone who would be calling like this, especially on a stormy night. The line went dead again before I could ask who it was. I set the phone down, feeling unsettled. The room suddenly felt colder, and the storm outside didn't help. The wind was howling now, rattling the windows, and the sound of rain was deafening. I tried to focus on my game, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept going back to the calls. What was she talking about? Who had left? And why was she apologizing to me? Another hour passed. It was almost midnight, and the storm was at its peak. I was about to turn off my PC and call it a night when my phone rang again. This time, it didn't just startle me, it filled me with dread. I didn't want to answer it, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. With a shaking hand, I picked up the phone. "Hello?" For a moment, there was only the sound of static. Then the voice came again, clearer this time. "I'm sorry I couldn't stay. I didn't want to leave you." The voice was more distinct now. It wasn't just soft, it was weak, like the person speaking was exhausted or in pain. And there was something else. The way she spoke, it felt like she knew me, but that was impossible. I didn't recognize her voice, and the things she was saying, they didn't make sense. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" There was no response, just more static. And then, suddenly, the line went dead again. At that point, I was done with it. I blocked the number and put my phone face down on the desk. I didn't care who it was anymore. The calls were creeping me out, and the last thing I needed was some prank caller messing with me during a storm like this. I turned my attention back to my computer, ready to shut it down. But something was off. My game, which had been running smoothly, had frozen. The screen was stuck, and no matter what I clicked, nothing responded. As I tried to close the game, the screen flickered and suddenly everything went black. The power had gone out. For a second, I just sat there in the darkness, listening to the storm rage outside. The only light came from the occasional flash of lightning. I reached for my phone to use the flashlight, but when I turned it over, my stomach dropped. The phone was lit up again. An incoming call. The same number. I had blocked it. How was it calling me? The phone continued to ring, the sound echoing in the silence of the apartment. I stared at it, frozen with fear. I didn't want to answer it, but something deep inside told me I had to. With trembling hands, I swiped to answer. "I'm sorry." The voice was quieter now, barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to leave, but I'm back now." And then, in the background, I heard something that made my blood run cold.
It was supposed to be a chill weekend, just Bruce and me hanging out. He had called earlier in the day asking if he could crash at my place because his apartment was under some repairs. Plus, with the forecast showing a heavy thunderstorm, it seemed like the perfect excuse to hunker down, play some games, and binge a couple of horror movies. I didn't think much of it when he mentioned he'd been feeling like someone was watching him lately. We both shrugged it off as paranoia. By the time Bruce arrived, the storm had already started, heavy rain battering the windows and the occasional flash of lightning lighting up the street outside. My place was at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, so it wasn't exactly the busiest part of town. We could hear the distant rumble of thunder growing louder as we set up the gaming console. "Perfect weather for some horror games, huh?" Bruce said, shaking the rain from his jacket. "Yeah, as long as the power doesn't go out," I laughed, but the thought lingered. A blackout in the middle of this storm would be the perfect backdrop for something weird to happen. We started gaming, completely absorbed in it. Time passed quickly with the storm outside adding a creepy ambiance, but something about tonight felt off. A few hours in, I got up to grab some snacks from the kitchen, and that's when I thought I saw something. A flash of movement outside the window. At first, I figured it was just the rain playing tricks on my eyes. I mean, with the wind whipping the branches of the trees around, anything could look suspicious in that kind of weather. "Did you see that?" I asked Bruce when I got back to the couch. "See what?" he mumbled, eyes glued to the screen. "Outside. I thought I saw something. Like someone?" Bruce finally paused the game and looked at me, raising an eyebrow. "Dude, it's probably just a reflection or something. You know how this kind of weather messes with your head." "Yeah, you're probably right," I muttered, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. We went back to playing, but I couldn't fully concentrate. My mind kept drifting back to that moment by the window. Every crack of thunder or flash of lightning made me jump a little more than usual. After a while, we both decided to take a break and watch a movie instead, something lighter to get our minds off the game. As we settled into the couch with a horror movie in the background, there was a knock at the door. Bruce and I exchanged glances. It was well past midnight, the storm outside was raging, and no one in their right mind would be out in this weather. I stood up slowly, feeling my pulse quicken. "Who the hell could that be?" Bruce muttered, his voice tense. I walked over to the door and peeked through the peephole. No one. I opened the door slightly and looked around the front porch. There was no one in sight, just sheets of rain pouring down and the wind howling. But when I looked down, there were muddy footprints leading away from the door, disappearing into the dark street. My stomach dropped. I quickly shut the door and locked it, my heart racing. "Bruce, someone's been here." "What do you mean? No one's outside, right?" "No, but there are footprints. Someone was definitely standing here and they just walked away." Bruce stood up, glancing out the window. Okay, that's seriously creepy. We both sat down, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a delivery person or someone from the neighborhood, but at this hour, in this storm, something didn't add up. The next hour passed in tense silence. We tried to act normal, but the strange knock had left us both on edge. Just as I started to relax a little, there was another knock. This time it came from the window. I jumped to my feet and grabbed a flashlight, shining it toward the sound. At first, I didn't see anything. But as the light swept across the window, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. There, standing just outside, was a man. He was soaked from the rain, his face obscured by the hood of his jacket. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring into the house. "Bruce, come here," I whispered, my throat tightening. Bruce rushed over, his face pale. "Is that—" "I don't know, he's just standing there." We both stared at the figure in the rain. The man didn't knock again. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching us. It was like he wanted us to know he was there, but didn't plan on coming any closer. "Call the cops," Bruce said, his voice shaking. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, trying to explain the situation while keeping my eyes on the man. The dispatcher told me to stay inside, lock the doors, and wait for officers to arrive. But the second I ended the call, the man was gone, just vanished into the rain. We both stood there in silence, listening to the storm, the only sound breaking the tension. It felt like hours before we saw the headlights of a police cruiser pull up outside. I rushed to the door, explaining everything to the officers about the knocks, the muddy footprints, and the man standing outside in the rain. One of the officers nodded and said, "We've been getting calls like this from around the area. Seems like someone's been going house to house, looking for an easy target." "What do you mean?" Bruce asked. "There's been a break-in at the other end of the street. The homeowner came back and found the back door open. The suspect might be scoping out places to hit next." Bruce and I exchanged horrified glances. The man we saw hadn't been just some weirdo out in the storm. He was looking for an opportunity. The officers asked if we had noticed anything else, and that's when Bruce remembered. "Actually, I've been feeling like someone's been watching me for the past week. I just thought I was imagining it." The officer's face darkened. "We'll check the neighborhood, but make sure all your doors and windows are locked tonight. Stay inside until we've cleared the area." The police searched the surrounding area, but they didn't find the guy. He had disappeared into the storm, leaving us on edge for the rest of the night. The rain finally let up in the early hours of the morning, but neither of us slept a wink. We never saw the man again, but for weeks after that night, every creak in the house or knock at the door sent my heart racing. We later learned that the man had been arrested after breaking into another house a few blocks away. He'd been watching people for days, waiting for the right moment. Bruce and I still hang out, but we're both a little more cautious now. We lock the doors twice, keep an eye on the windows, and try not to talk about that night. The night we realized someone had been watching us all along.